I watched as the page burned, and I cried, because the words that were written and the dance they made were gone forever.
But that's the life we've chosen, to burn our history page by page, and to write a fiction replacing it.
I turned away, but saw from the sparks we'd made the earth was burning too. And because of the smoke we walked in darkness. Freedom is lost. The American dream is dead, and the earth is raped. The villain in the mirror is grinning back. The dream of America was born in democracy and killed by the free market. With our first breath we declared all men equal in creation, inalienably due life, liberty, and singular ambition. With manifest clarity we knew that every child should have the same opportunity, that every generation would increase our prosperity,
that merit is our greatest common ground, and that peace is our gift to those we make in our image. But our democracy was conceived as a right of capital ownership, and participation required it.
Political power and economic power were inextricably entwined. But while suffrage expanded, economic power narrowed, and in the separation democracy broke. Holdings must be spread and rooted within the population, or democracy cannot represent the people. Yet somehow freedom of capital gained reverence over freedom of man, ignorant that peace and sustainable prosperity can only be a result of the morality of the latter, not the amorality of the former. Unchecked, capitalism is rigged.
Capital inherently coalesces in a state of nature.
An amoral or immoral, self-serving act always wins in the dark. It is only pooled, in society, that good can hope to win against the alternative. Society must ensure that the rules promote the public interest, or it reigns oppression with counterfeit legitimacy. Now, all that remains of our grand experiment is a puppet democracy, a morbid, disgraceful display. Collecting in its wake are the poverty, dependency, and environmental destruction that are the waste products of unbridled free market capitalism. And what we create here is amplified around the world. Poverty has always been a feature of private capital consolidation, but extreme poverty needed a global market engine. The more divorced ownership is from action, the more spectacular the casualties.
Extreme poverty was bred from the fevered consumption of raw materials and attendant displacement of native populations, spurred by 15th century and beyond colonialism and 18th century industrialization. These populations were displaced from plots which could sustain them into large population centers where they were dependent on inadequate employment and where their numbers grew exponentially. Poverty, environmental degradation, disease, and war collaborate in a vicious, deadly cycle. Poverty both exacerbates environmental problems, ballooning developing world populations, rainforest deforestation, etc., and absorbs most of the negative consequences: consumption of unhealthy food, exposure to toxins, incidence of disease caused by environmental factors, impact from disasters influenced by environmental change, impact from conflict and violence caused by environmental degradation, etc. So while industry has always exploited the poor and polluted the environment, in the context of modern global capitalism, the consequences are shocking. We've been led, step by step, past the crest of an economic genocide to the precipice of an environmental crisis, and the poor are on the front lines of the violence and the destruction. The romance of our democracy is that right will win in the light, but who promised the sun? It is darkness that we see by. The modern world is consumed by the failings, weaknesses, and evils of others. The genius of our system is that those are also the main human casualties. Failure, inequality, marginalization, exploitation, etc. As such, the system promotes our destruction and feeds it back to us on a platter. Once, media played a vital role in service to our self-governance. It provided a feedback mechanism to self-correct and to drive public understanding. It does no longer. As packaged, it corrupts instead of informing. We do not learn, we do not improve, We are fed sensationalism by a fast food media apparatus engineered by corporate capital interests to drive profit, not public good. Hot off the press or the griddle, it's cheaply produced and tastes good, but it will kill us. Better produced is the fear we're fed by the same apparatus. It spurs stagnation over action, division over consensus. By fostering small public pluralities, we are more easily manipulated along the margin, allowing financed interests to divide and gain public opinion. And by teaching voyeurism and a consumption lifestyle, we are driven to spending and resource exploitation beyond our means. So we sit on our little molehills and wallow in the misery of others, strangely voyeuristic in our individualism. We're obsessed with the problems of others and ignore our own part in it. We guard our privacy and violate that of others. We look outward and hide inward. We act as though what we do and what we say is somehow insulated or harmless. Imagined separation affords space for a lot of weeds to grow, a lot of dirty little secrets hidden in plain sight. Well, guess what? It's not a secret. And we're as guilty as the next person for what we've allowed and what we've done, as individuals, as a community, and as nations. It is the inertia of the fragmented. We think of ourselves as everything and nothing. What good could we possibly do, and what bad could we possibly do? So we do little good and much bad. We know something is broken, but we don't fix it. We want to change the world, but we never do. Well, let me tell you a secret. We aren't building anything here. When we're gone, all that will prove our existence is our waste and our destruction. In America, 10 million people, 12%, are clearly in poverty. Maybe 30 million people go in and out of poverty over time. But 2 out of 3 people are building no wealth. 10% of Americans own 70% of the capital. The bottom 50% of Americans own less than 3%. Something is wrong. We are spending more than we earn every day of our lives. And we are spending on subsistence and lifestyle. Too few have too much, and too many have nothing. We are a population of displaced individuals who have little option but to participate in a broken system. The vast majority have no plot of productive land for simple, self-sufficient subsistence, and no wealth or capital. We are dependent, interdependent, in fact. Modern value creation is a murderous beast, where wealth is not measured in man-hours, but lives converted to capital. Humanity as a vessel for value transfer. Like any conduction medium, the point is efficient pass-through. Each human life can be counted on to generate, say, $1 or $2 million, and to transfer that at a high rate to someone's wealth. We are just another natural resource. There's value in our productivity, and there's inherent value in our warm mass. The engine is consumer debt. It helps ensure that we don't worry much about collecting wealth, reducing pass-through, and it increases the velocity of our consumption. The negative balance when we die is but small debit to the total. In December 2004, the United Nations declared poverty, disease, and the environment collectively as the top interrelated threat to global security. It instituted the Poverty Environment Initiative to promote governmental action which simultaneously addresses both poverty and the environment, but we ignore the underlying threat. We see a grim horizon and question if democracy really fosters peace worldwide. Well, democracy is not the dominant force in the world, capitalism is. That same capitalism that treats people and the earth as exploitable resources, and that generates economic power by processing those resources. Sure, capitalism is efficient in the task, brutally so, and sure it results in a degree of liberalization worldwide, and perhaps nominal democratization. But used indiscriminately, it is destructive and unsustainable. It is a tool, not an end, as clearly demonstrated by authoritarian regimes like China, which seek to foster goals far different from those we state. If our ideals mean anything, the global capital engine must be curbed. The free market must be shackled, and excessive private capital accumulation must be stopped, or far different standards will shape the future. It is not an issue of evil men, necessarily. It is men with inappropriate power. It is too much power in too narrow service. At worst, that power corrupts. At best, it misaligns with the public interest. As they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there are bodies in the wake. No alternative to life. Hungry Man in Tenderloin, San Francisco, October 2006.
Hungry John Quinn, hunched over a trash can in the Tenderloin. As I pass, he stands, vacantly staring nowhere in particular.
He wears a black leather jacket and hospital bottoms. There's darkness about his eyes. The whites aren't white, rather slight shades of his skin. But when the light catches, so do they. I circle and return from another direction. He's grim, and I expect dismissal. I ask if I can take his picture. He smiles and says, "Why, sure you can." He has only a single tooth. He lives in a nearby, poorly ventilated, low-income hotel. He just got out of the hospital and has been trying to get money for food. He had a heart attack. Says he's had to quit smoking. I ask about his blue eyes, if anyone else in his family has had them. Says no, just me and my mule. There's an animation in him that he seems to save, and an intelligence that surprises. We talk of the time he met Martin Luther King in the airport leaving for India. We talk of his graduation from Berkeley, his acceptance to law school, and the drug use which would take him elsewhere. He talks of South Africa's honorary whites, India's untouchables, and Satra's essence of a man. He describes an exchange between South Africa's Botha and Nelson Mandela, when the latter was in prison. Botha insists that Mandela renounce violence as an alternative if he wishes release. Mandela refuses, responding that there is no alternative to life, and that he will do whatever is necessary to live. October 12, 2006.
Thank you, Tom. So from your speech and your powerful presentation, I understand that the pictures we see have an invisible subtext. Your
Perhaps.
critique of capitalism, which one might not detect on first sight. Okay, the floor is open. Any immediate responses to this very bold and direct statement? Makes everyone speechless. Yes.
You've described a little bit how you make contact with John, was it?
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear a little more about how you approach your subject in general, because it does seem from the picture as if you established contact before you took the picture.
Right. I try to
left a certain kind of dignity there in the process.
What I'm about when I'm talking to people or when I'm meeting people is learning their story and interacting with them, learning about their lives, and fostering that communication. The camera, as much as possible, I try to minimize it, and I try not to take a picture very quickly. So I just go up and ask if I can take a picture or take their photograph, but I don't, and rather I use that as an excuse to talk to them about their lives. It also helps as well because people get nervous from photo shoots, so it's not about a photo shoot, it's about a conversation, and then I try to take some pictures of that interaction while we go about it.
Yes.
Do you tell people what you're going to do with the photographs?
Speak up.
Do you tell people what you're going to do with the photographs?
Yeah.
And how do they react to that?
I guess they find it interesting. They're more interested in why I'm going to take their photograph, and usually that has something to do with physical characteristics, their eyes or otherwise. And, I try to frame it as a compliment, which really it is. But I typically try to remain
fairly true to providing a connection. There's three people involved. I'm the window, but there's also the audience and the person, and I'm trying to make that connection on a human level, and as much as possible have the environment be reflected by the person and by the face. I mean, you'll notice most of this is really pretty close up. When you go color, especially with this population, it can more often than not be more sensational. You've got sores, you've got all this other stuff, and I think, or I've felt, that you stray more often than not, again, away from just that human connection and more towards something else. And really what I'm trying to do is, influence a degree of caring.
Now, I talked about the tension between the text and the image, and I think this is a great example of what I sense, but maybe can't quite put into words, is that when I first saw this picture, let's say, if we were to look at the picture out of its context, we would see an older gentleman with striking eyes, right? And he doesn't come across as a homeless person. It's not obvious. He wears a leather jacket. So at first, I felt this confrontational gaze was basically, holding me in my tracks, and I had to dwell on it, and it was engaging in that respect. But the text then reveals that this is a homeless man. Yes, he's wearing a leather jacket, as we see, but the text tells us that he's also wearing hospital pants. The text tells us that he just had a heart attack, and the image shows someone who seems fairly healthy. And, the back and forth. And then, having read the text, we know that this is a homeless person. Now we look at it in a different light, and then we learn that this homeless person is well educated, graduated from Berkeley, and that he has very sophisticated political views about Mandela, etc., and also his own little philosophy. So I thought there was a lot happening there going on. Is this a projection on my part, or
No, certainly.
true, or
I
what do you
had
feel
come at this photography series from a perspective of stories, and it was really more of a research tool for learning stories. And really, in its evolution, it kind of took two different tracks in parallel, perhaps. And so I always sort of thought of them separately, the story and the photograph. And realistically, I was, I guess, a bit surprised that they worked. They seemed to have a resonance and seemed to work well together. And I think, for instance, as you described, I don't think I couldn't do similar things with just one. I wouldn't show him with his mouth open and a tooth hanging, and I wouldn't show, an image that I wouldn't be happy to show him necessarily. I go a little bit on the edge of that, but I want to, honor him to a certain extent, but I also want to describe. So I choose an image that, honors him, but I also describe what's going on, and in a way that I couldn't really provide without both the story and the photo. I've been told often I look like I'm homeless when I'm photographing.
Okay. There's this famous episode of Jack London dressing down and going into the London East End, to actually connect, but he does camouflage. I'm not asking are you camouflaging yourself. I'm just wondering.
I do.
You do.
I do. Yeah. Although I stand out a little bit just because of my height and whatnot.
personal?
I wouldn't do it otherwise. The point is,
If so, how?
well, I think I do this as a reflection of unhappiness with the way things are to a certain extent, and it helps me understand how things could be better. And I think that's important for someone, or anyone who seeks happiness in this life.
And I mentioned earlier that some of these images remind me of the FSA photography of the 1930s. And first of all, what do you think of some of the images of Walker Evans or Dorothea Lange? Were you influenced in any way by the
Not as much
tradition of the
Walker,
30s?
but definitely Dorothea Lange. And that one is compared to Migrant Mother a little bit. The Faith and Grace behind me. I guess I see. I feel for Dorothea Lange, I think there's a dignity and an honoring that I feel overlaps with my intent.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of other folks, there's some overlap with sort of an Avedon artistically, and an Arbus in terms of where I look, but I try to show it differently.
And what about the cropping? Because that's always the same. It's basically medium close-up, and it's the face. And
It's often the same. It's a function of where I am and how close I am. So,
because you're not using
Right.
a zoom.
right, so I've got a fixed lens and I'm standing right next to a person and, you know, it's an interaction, so it's not a cropping, it's you know, usually the frame, and well, that's the square, but it's just, you know, that interaction is we're talking, we're interacting, we're moving, we're doing, you know, and so it's in that dance of interaction that the photo and the window happens. Many of these people have done bad things, and many of these people have been in prison, and none of these people are angels, but really are any of us.